We're diving into something you probably encounter every day, but rarely give a second thought. Terms and conditions.
Ah, the fine print.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're specifically looking at those for Maya Bank, a digital bank popular in the Philippines.
Interesting choice. You might be thinking terms and conditions. That sounds thrilling. But trust me, these documents aren't just boring legal jargon.
I'm listening.
They offer a glimpse into the often hidden relationship between you, the user, and a powerful financial institution.
Okay, I'm intrigued. We've got excerpts from the Maya Bank terms and conditions, and I'm ready for some surprises. What's the first stop on our journey?
Let's start with the foundation. My bank is fully licensed by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, the Philippines Central Bank.
Right, so they're legit.
Exactly. This means they operate under strict regulations, especially when it comes to preventing things like money laundering.
So they're playing by the rules, which is reassuring. But what does that mean for us everyday users?
Well, it gives Maya Bank significant power. For example, the terms state that they can report any suspicious activity on your account to the Anti-Money Laundering Council, or AMLC for short.
AMLC. Got it.
This council is a government agency dedicated to combating financial crimes.
So Maya Bank acts as a sort of financial watchdog, keeping an eye out for anything fishy. That makes sense, but it also raises some questions about user privacy. What exactly constitutes suspicious activity, and could this power be misused?
Those are excellent questions. The terms don't explicitly define suspicious activity, which leaves room for interpretation. It's important to consider the potential implications for user privacy and the importance of transparency in these processes.
It definitely makes you think twice about what you do with your account. Speaking of things that could raise red flags, the terms also mention that Maya Bank can suspend or block accounts if they suspect illegal or fraudulent activity.
Yes. And they can even refuse transactions if they can't verify your identity or the recipient's. Think about that next time you're trying to snag a deal during an online flash sale.
Okay, so Maya Bank has some serious power when it comes to monitoring and controlling accounts. It's like they hold the keys to our digital kingdom. What about our side of the equation? What are our responsibilities as users?
The terms lay out some interesting rules for us, too. For example, did you know that you're not allowed to use any bots or automated tools to scrape data from their app or website?
That makes sense, I guess. They're probably trying to protect their systems and data.
Right.
But it also highlights the increasing complexity of our digital lives. We're constantly interacting with these platforms, often without fully understanding the rules of engagement.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to delve into these terms and conditions. They provide a roadmap to understanding the digital landscape we navigate every day.
So we've explored Maya Bank's role as a financial watchdog and our responsibilities as users. But there's another big piece of the puzzle: data. What do these terms say about how our personal information is handled?
That's where things get really interesting. The terms state that you give Maya Bank permission to process and store your personal information. However, they also emphasize compliance with the Philippines Data Privacy Act, which aims to protect individuals' sensitive data.
That's reassuring. It seems like they're trying to strike a balance between using our data to provide services and protecting our privacy. But I also noticed that they mention sharing data with affiliates, like PLDT and Smart Communications. Those are major telecommunications companies in the Philippines, right?
Yes, they are. Maya Bank is part of a larger conglomerate, and this data sharing raises important questions about how our information is used across different platforms.
So even if we trust Maya Bank with our data, are we comfortable with it being shared with other companies, especially those in completely different industries? And what does that mean for our privacy in the long run?
Those are crucial questions to consider. The terms don't delve into the specifics of how this data sharing works in practice, leaving some ambiguity about the scope of our consent. It's worth pondering the potential implications of this data flow within the larger ecosystem.
It's like we're handing over the keys to our digital castle without fully understanding who else might have access. This data sharing aspect is definitely something to keep in mind as we continue our deep dive. But before we get too lost in the digital weeds, let's shift gears a bit and talk about what happens when things go wrong. What if there's a dispute, like a transaction error?
That's a great question. And luckily, the terms do outline a process for handling disputes.
Okay, that's good to know. What exactly does that process look like?
Well, the first thing to note is that any disagreements will be governed by Philippine law and settled in the courts of Mandaluyong City, where Maya Bank's headquarters are located.
So it's important to be aware of that jurisdictional element if you ever find yourself in a dispute with the bank.
Absolutely. And there's another interesting detail in the terms about how Maya Bank can change the rules of the game, so to speak.
Wait, they can just change the terms and conditions whenever they want. What if those changes aren't in our favor?
That's a valid concern. They do have the right to amend the terms at any time, but they are required to give you 60 days notice.
Okay, so it's not a complete free-for-all. At least we have some time to review the changes and decide if we're still comfortable with the terms. But I bet most people don't even pay attention to these updates.
You're probably right. But it highlights the importance of staying informed and not just blindly clicking agree every time we encounter those pop-up notifications.
It's like signing a contract without reading the fine print. We need to be more proactive about understanding the terms we're agreeing to, especially when it comes to something as important as our finances.
I couldn't agree more. And this brings us to a fascinating question. Why are these terms and conditions often written in such dense and confusing language? It's almost like they're trying to keep us in the dark. Yeah.
It's true. Shouldn't these documents be written in plain language that everyone can understand? After all, they govern our access to essential services and the use of our personal data.
You raise a valid point. There's a growing movement advocating for greater transparency and accessibility in legal documents.
Which is a good thing, because we all deserve to understand the terms we're agreeing to, especially when it comes to something as important as our digital lives. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from Maya Bank's power to monitor accounts and our responsibilities as users, to the intricacies of data sharing and dispute resolution. But I feel like we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
You're absolutely right. There's so much more to unpack. We haven't even touched on the fascinating topic of data ownership and control in the context of digital banking. Who actually owns our data in this digital ecosystem? And do we have any real control over how it's used and shared?
Those are great questions that deserve a deep dive of their own, and that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the next part of this episode. We'll delve into the evolving landscape of digital rights and the potential implications for users like you.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Maya Bank terms and conditions.
We've been exploring some fascinating aspects of these terms and conditions, like how Maya Bank can monitor accounts and their data sharing practices.
Right.
Before we move on, I'm really curious to dig deeper into this whole issue of data ownership.
Okay.
It feels like a bit of a gray area in the digital world.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Even though you grant Maya Bank permission to process and store your data, the question of who actually owns that data is still a matter of debate. Legally speaking, data ownership is complex with different interpretations.
So it's not as simple as saying Maya Bank owns all the data we generate while using their app?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Some legal experts argue that users retain ownership of their data even when it's being processed by a third party.
So it's more like we're entrusting Maya Bank with our data for a specific purpose, but we still have the ultimate say in how it's used.
That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
But in reality, most users don't have much practical control over how the data is used once it's in the hands of a company like Maya Bank.
Yeah.
The terms and conditions don't really give us much leverage in that regard.
That's a little unsettling.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that they're also sharing our data with their affiliates, like PLDT and Smart Communications.
Right.
Imagine your banking data being used to target you with telecom ads.
Oh, yeah.
It blurs the lines between these seemingly separate services.
Right. And this data sharing raises important questions about consent.
Exactly.
Did we really agree to have our financial data used for marketing purposes by a telecommunications company?
It makes you wonder if the convenience of digital banking comes at the cost of our privacy.
That's the trade-off we need to carefully consider. The good news is there's a growing movement focused on data rights and digital sovereignty, aiming to give users more control over their personal information.
That sounds promising. What exactly does this movement entail? What are they fighting for?
One central idea is data portability.
Okay.
This means you should be able to easily transfer your data from one service to another.
Gotcha.
So if you're unhappy with how Maya Bank is handling your data, you should be able to take it with you and switch to a competitor.
That makes sense. It's like moving your belongings from one apartment to another.
Yeah.
No more being held hostage by a company just because they have your data.
Exactly.
What other principles are part of this data rights movement?
Another key element is data transparency.
Okay.
Companies should be clear and upfront about how they collect, use, and share our data.
Right.
No more hiding behind legalese and confusing terms and conditions.
That sounds like a breath of fresh air. More transparency would definitely empower users to make informed choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And finally, there's data minimization.
Okay.
This means companies should only collect the data they absolutely need for a specific purpose.
Yeah.
No more data hoarding, just because.
So it's all about respecting users' privacy and limiting the potential for misuse or abuse of their data.
Exactly. It's about shifting the balance of power back towards the users.
This data rights movement is really inspiring. It feels like we're starting to reclaim our power in this increasingly data-driven world.
It's a step in the right direction, for sure, but it's a long road ahead.
Yeah.
Achieving true data rights requires a concerted effort from governments, businesses, and individuals.
So it's not just about waiting for someone else to fix it.
Right.
We all have a responsibility to advocate for a better digital future.
Yeah.
But let's get back to the Maya Bank terms and conditions.
Okay.
We've talked about their data practices, but what happens if something goes wrong?
That's a crucial aspect we haven't explored yet.
Yeah.
What happens if there's a transaction error, a security breach, or simply a disagreement with Maya Bank?
Okay, let's dive into that.
Sure.
What kind of protections do we have as users?
The terms do outline a dispute resolution process, but it's important to understand the limitations.
Okay.
As we mentioned earlier, any disputes will be governed by Philippine law and handled in the courts of Mandaluyong City.
So even if you're living abroad and using Maya Bank, any legal battles would have to be fought on their home turf.
That seems to be the case based on the terms and conditions.
Hmm.
And there's another important point to consider.
Okay.
Maya Bank's liability in certain situations is actually quite limited.
Wait, what does that mean? Are they saying they're not fully responsible if something bad happens, like a security breach or an unauthorized transaction?
They essentially state that they make no warranty, express or implied, regarding the performance or functionalities of their products and services. So if their app malfunctions and you lose money, their liability might be limited.
That doesn't seem very fair.
Yeah,
What about security? Don't they have an obligation to protect our accounts from hackers and fraudsters?
they do mention security measures, but they also make it clear that they're not responsible for any losses resulting from unauthorized access, even if it's due to their own negligence.
Hold on, so even if they make a mistake that compromises our security, we're the ones who bear the brunt of the consequences.
That seems to be the implication of these clauses.
Wow.
They're essentially shifting some of the risk onto the users.
It feels like a bit of a double standard.
Yeah,
We're trusting them with our sensitive financial information, but they're not fully committing to protecting it.
it highlights the power imbalance that often exists in these digital relationships.
This is making me think twice about the level of trust we place in these digital platforms.
Hmm.
It's like we're handing over the keys to our financial lives without a guarantee of safety.
It's definitely something to ponder,
Yeah,
and it reinforces the importance of being informed consumers.
right.
We need to understand the risks we're taking and the limited protections in place.
Knowledge is power, right? By understanding these terms, we can at least make informed decisions about how we use these services.
Exactly. It's about being aware of the potential downsides and taking steps to mitigate those risks.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
It is.
It's fascinating and a little unnerving to realize how much power these digital platforms wield.
It is, and it underscores the importance of these conversations.
Yeah.
By shedding light on these often overlooked documents, we can empower ourselves and others to navigate the digital world more consciously.
I totally agree. But for now, I think we need a moment to process all this information.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring the Maya Bank terms and conditions. And let's be honest, some of the things we've uncovered have been a bit unsettling. Like the fact that their liability in certain situations is limited even if something goes wrong on their end.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind when using any digital platform, not just Maya Bank. It's like realizing the fine print can have real-world consequences.
So knowing all this, what can users do to protect themselves? What are some practical steps we can take to navigate this digital landscape more safely?
Well, the first line of defense is always good security hygiene. Strong passwords, two-factor authentication. These are essential for any online account, especially those involving finances.
It's like locking your front door, but in the digital world. You wouldn't leave your house unlocked, so why would you leave your online accounts vulnerable?
Exactly. And be vigilant about phishing scams. Don't click on suspicious links or give out personal information unless you're absolutely sure you're on a legitimate website.
It's like being a digital detective, always on the lookout for red flags. But even with the best security practices, things can still go wrong. What if there's a transaction error or an unauthorized charge? What recourse do we have?
The terms do outline a dispute resolution process, but as we've discussed, there are limitations. Disputes are governed by Philippine law and would be handled in the courts of Mandaluyong City.
So it's good to be aware of that jurisdictional element. It could mean a potentially lengthy and complex process, especially for users who aren't located in the Philippines.
It definitely highlights the importance of understanding the terms you're agreeing to and carefully weighing the risks and benefits of using any online service.
It's a balancing act, isn't it? We want the convenience and accessibility of digital banking, but we also need to be mindful of the potential downsides.
Absolutely. And it's not just about protecting ourselves as individuals. It's also about advocating for stronger consumer protections and pushing for more transparency and accountability from these companies.
So it's a combination of individual responsibility and collective action. We need to be informed consumers, but we also need to demand better from the companies we entrust with our data and our money.
Exactly. It's about shaping a digital landscape that is more equitable, transparent, and ultimately more trustworthy.
It's about reclaiming our power in this increasingly digital world. Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Maya Bank terms and conditions. It's been an eye-opening journey, to say the least.
I agree. We've uncovered some surprising details, raised important questions, and hopefully empowered listeners to navigate the digital world with more awareness and confidence.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic, so stay tuned. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.